On this episode of This Week in Linux, we got a lot of big releases from Xfce, FFmpeg, and LibreOffice. NVidia announced something we never expected them to. They've actually started releasing documentation related to their hardware. There were some reports for a zero-day exploit concerning KDE, so we'll take a look at that. In Distro news, Voyager Linux released a new version, and we got some interesting news from Ubuntu regarding their usage of ZFS. In the sad news area of the show, the Linux Journal announced they will be shutting their doors again. Later in the show, we'll check out the new operating system from Huawei. AMD Firmware Updates are rolling out for Linux support, and we'll take a look at an app to display your Android phone on your desktop. All that and much more coming up. I'm Michael Tennell with Tux Digital, and this is your weekly source for Linux GNews. This episode of This Week in Linux is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, integrated firewalls, multiple storage options, load balancers, and more. You can get all this plus access to the world-class customer support for as low as $5 per month. DigitalOcean also has 2,000 cloud-agnostic tutorials to help you stay up to date with the latest open-source software, languages, and frameworks. You can get started on DigitalOcean for 1 month for free with a $50 credit by going to do.co/tux. That's do.co/tux. Again, you can get started on DigitalOcean for that with $50 credit by going to do.co/tux. Thanks again for DigitalOcean for sponsoring This Week in Linux. So up first in the show is some really great news, and that is Xfce 4.14 has been released. So Xfce is one of those DEs that's known for being very stable, very reliable, and having a lot of flexibility, as well as being very modular. One of the other things it's known for is taking a while to update things. Well, not necessarily update, because they do security updates and that kind of thing, but updates in the sense of like new features in like the aspect of big releases. So this has actually been, I think, the 3 years since the last release of 4.12. So if you're not aware, 4.12 is the last stable release, 4.13. They do it in the structure of even numbers are release numbers and odd numbers are development numbers. So as soon as 4.15 starts development, that will be the development of that branch. But when that one's ready, it'll be switched to 4.16 because they do an even odd structure. That's a common version scheme as well, but that's how they do it anyway. So there's three years has been since 4.12, and 4.14 adds a lot of great things. Now, there's too many things to really talk about everything in this episode, so I'm going to cover the most important things as well as a few interesting things. So the biggest thing in this release has to be the GTK3 support. So they've been talking about supporting for GTK3 for a while. They've been developing it for a very long time, and that was the main goal for 4.14 to release with GTK3 support. Now, I couldn't verify if everything has been ported to GTK3, but pretty much everything I could find had been ported to GTK3. There might be some things here and there I missed, but it seems like everything is GTK3 compatible, which is fantastic because that means also it gets better high DPI support, and they've also improved other things like the improvement of management and color profiles. This is not necessarily related to GTK3 anymore, but they've improved the startup sessions. They've improved the display profile functionality. They've actually made it improved it to ensure more flicker-free experience, and when you're changing display setups really frequently. They've also improved like the usability, so they've added a right-click drag and drop functionality, additional zoom accelerators, keyboard shortcuts for switching tabs, and many more things. They've also improved the Thunar file manager a couple ways, and for example, probably the biggest thing is the external drive mount improvements. They've also improved some fixes for the placement of new windows when you open a new application or a new window, it will now default to the current display. Because it used to do it where it would default to the primary display instead of the current display that you're on. So this is using whatever your display your mouse cursor is on, that is where it will open those windows, which is nice because it makes it a lot more convenient. Of course, there's a lot more there's a lot more things that have been added in this release, and it's hard to really narrow down all the great stuff that's been added. I'll have a link to the show notes, and in the show notes I have a link to the release notes, because there's quite a few things in there, and it's definitely worth checking out. Also, Destination Linux episode 135 is going to have an interview with the developers from Xfce. It's either going to be Simon Steinboss or Sean Davis. We haven't actually narrowed that down yet, which one is going to do it, but we look forward to doing that. So if you're not aware, I'm actually a host of Destination Linux as well as this podcast, so definitely check that out at destinationlinux.org. The next episode is 134. That will not include the interview. The one after that, 135, that will include the interview. So there's going to be a lot of great information we're going to get from that one. So be sure to check that out and subscribe to that podcast as well, if you're not already subscribed, of course. So yeah, if you want to find out more before that happens, check out the show notes, and there'll be a link to the release notes for Xfce 4.14. Up next in the show is the latest release of FFmpeg 4.2, which is codenamed Ada. Now, this is a first release in about a year or so, actually a little bit less than a year. I think it was November of last year. But there's a lot of great stuff in this release. If you're not aware, FFmpeg is one of those projects that is fundamental to open source in many ways. So FFmpeg is a decoder and an encoder for audio, video, just multimedia in general. You can do so much with FFmpeg. It's kind of ridiculous, and at the same time how awesome it is. But it's also kind of ridiculous in the sense that a lot of people don't know that FFmpeg exists or what it's for and that kind of thing, because it's one of those huge projects that doesn't really get a lot of attention. Because if you use a video editing or you use audio editing or whatever, it's almost guaranteed. I wouldn't say completely, but 9 out of 10 times the application you're using is going to use FFmpeg in the back end to do all the rendering and all that stuff for you. And it's also not even just a Linux-based system. The project is also available on macOS. It's also on Windows. It's on BSD. I think it's on Solaris too. I'm not sure about that one, but it's basically available for everything, and it's fantastic. Now, the latest release adds a lot of cool stuff, and I don't want to go into super detail on everything because there's a lot, but I do want to talk about a couple things. So first of all, let's talk about the filters for TPad have been made. They've actually added some releases for improvements to Chroma Shift, True HD Core, Mask Fun. They've added color hold, ASL, and AV1 frame split bitstream. Now I'm gonna get in more detail in AV1 in a minute. But they've also done some more improvements and added some more decoders, which is HYMT, ARBC, the VP4 video encoder, the LSCR encoder, as well as the AV1 encoder. Now, the AV1 I said I was going to talk about, and it's because this is a very, very interesting format. This is a format that is going to be, hopefully, I mean, it's pretty much in the position already, but it's very likely to be replacing MP4 and MP5. So if you've never done video editing or video production and whatever, you might not know, but MP4 is a format that's been around for a very long time, and it's basically ubiquitous. So MP4 is everywhere. Most people upload their YouTube videos with MP4. They'll put MP4 on various different websites here and there, and a lot of the times if you try to upload something, they will suggest that you use MP4. Now, the reason why that is because it became a standard quite a while back, but the reason why it's a problem is because it's a proprietary standard. And MP5 that will be replacing MP4 is also a proprietary standard. Now, AV1 is not proprietary. It's a completely open source format, and it is trying to position itself as the standard. Now, the reason why I'm excited about this is because it likely will be, because of the people backing it as well as the performance that it offers. So it's going to be less file size than MP5, and it's going to be a better performant than MP5, as well as having better quality visuals. So like a better bit rate and everything. So I'm super excited about it. So AV1 is the AO Media Video 1 format and encoding, and it's being actually backed by all kinds of things like Netflix, Amazon Prime's using it, their YouTube's using it. All kinds of different companies are backing it, which means it has a very, very high likelihood of it supporting or becoming the standard. So this is awesome that FFmpeg is supporting it, because FFmpeg is a very important project for the Linux ecosystem as well as just in general. So it's really great that they're doing that. They're doing support through something I like to it's just fun to say for me. They have a library called DAV1D, or as I like to say, David, because I think that's fun. It probably isn't supposed to be that, but I think it's fun, so I do it anyway. So library libdavid. Anyway, so AV1, super excited about the support for this, because it means we can do a lot of stuff with this particular encoding feature, and it makes it a lot easier to support AV1 going forward for things like Kdenlive and all the other editors like Shotcut and OpenShot and etc. So I'm super excited about that, and I can't wait to try it out. So anyway, if you haven't heard about FFmpeg, it's really great, really awesome. Definitely need to look into it, as well as maybe support it in the donation sense or whatever, because it is fundamentally an important piece of the ecosystem, and it doesn't really get that much of attention. That's why I wanted to put it on the show, and because I like it and I use it all the time. I use it every episode I make this show. I use it for the encoding because it's the best for this, for encoding in Linux. So yeah, if you'd like to learn more about FFmpeg, I'll have a link to the release notes for 4.2 in the show notes. So going from some really great news with FFmpeg to some unfortunate news with the Linux Journal. So the Linux Journal actually has announced that they're shutting down again. And this is unfortunate because, well, I'm a fan of the Linux Journal, so I'm sad to see it go. They've actually done a lot of great work recently as well. If you're not aware, they actually started doing some really great things in their issues with the deep dives. That was really cool. They would take an issue, they would take a topic, each issue, and go really deep into it with like very, very deep investigative journalism type approach. So that was really cool. They also started doing some podcasting, which was great to see. They haven't been doing the podcasting that long, so it's weird that it's they didn't seem like they had that much time to build up their new platform and new system before it was killed. And the thing that actually annoys me the most about this particular topic is how sudden it was. Like, the August issue of Linux Journal was released a couple days before this announcement. The same thing with the podcast, their podcast for the Linux Journal. They issued a new episode, and then it's dead, and then they announce it's dead. So it seems like the company who owned the Linux Journal came in and just killed it without any warning. Now, I'm not saying that that's true, because I don't know for a fact. I have not had that confirmed by an employee of Linux Journal, but it does appear as that's what happened, because all of a sudden they were making content and then they weren't. So I don't know. And it's a shame, because a lot of the stuff they've been doing has been really good, and they've actually been like tweaking a lot of things. Like, they added a new website, they added a Patreon system, they did a lot of cool stuff with the podcasting and the deep dives and stuff like that. So it's kind of a shame, because it doesn't seem like they had enough time. I mean, they've made some missteps and hired some people that weren't that good at writing, of course, but mistakes here and there happen, of course, but at the same time, they also hired a lot of great writers, like the guy who wrote the article both times for the closing of the magazine. This particular article about the announcement is actually kind of funny. Now, it's sad news, sure, but the article was written pretty well, and it was pretty funny, because he gave an analogy of, how if you're going to a meeting or you're hanging out with your friends and whatever, and you decide to both leave and you say your goodbyes, and then you start walking away, but you're walking in the same direction and it's super awkward. That's kind of like what this is. And I thought that was a fantastic analogy for this situation, because they already said goodbye and now they're going to have to do it again, and it's a little bit more awkward from this time. And anyway, I just think that was pretty funny. But If you're not aware, the company Linux Journal was purchased by Private Internet Access, the VPN company. And for the majority of the time, I've promoted Private Internet Access because they've been doing quite a few things. This particular thing annoys me because it was so sudden and because it seemed to be like out of the blue. It's weird because I also don't think they had enough time, because their whole reason Linux Journal was closing the first time, which was way back in December of 2017, which is not way back, actually, technically way back in the terms of this podcast, because it was actually episode 16 that I covered that. We're on episode 78 now, so way back in terms of this podcast, but it's only been like a year and a half, a little bit over that. And I don't think that's enough time for you to completely restructure a company that is based on a medium that is essentially dead, like magazines. Because Linux Journal's been around for a very long time, since 1994. So that's ridiculous in terms of, consistency of a company, especially with a magazine, because magazines is a dying medium, if not already dead. Now, some people would argue it's already dead. Some people were saying there's still some magazines around, so it's technically not dead, but whatever. It's basically dead. So they have to restructure everything in how they do stuff. And I do think that Linux Journal did a good job. And I'm just sad. I'm just disappointed that they did this, in a random, sudden killing of it. And it kind of makes me feel a little bit annoyed by Private Internet Access, because they came out the first time saying that they're rescuing and they're saving the company, and they didn't really I don't think they gave it enough time, because they were changing quite a few things, and I think they had a lot of potential to, Anyway, I'm sad to see it go. I wish them all the best, everybody involved, and so that's it. Bye to the Linux Journal. It's been great having you around and all the great content that you've made. So this episode of This Week in Linux is kind of like a roller coaster of emotions, because previously, the first couple topics were very happy, very exciting topics, and the next topic was a pretty sad topic, and then this particular topic is a very annoying and, frustrating topic. So it's a little bit of a roller coaster. So anyway, let's get to the point. KDE's had a 0-day exploit that was released on Twitter. Now, the Twitter account that released it calls himself a security researcher and also a white hat wizard. So this is this is definitely an issue. This is a vulnerability. Now, there are some people who have talked about how there's a vulnerability versus exploit argument here. There isn't one, because if you're not aware, a vulnerability is when someone finds an issue and tells the developers to, that it exists and to fix it. An exploit is that when the vulnerability is found, someone builds something to be able to exploit it. And in this particular case, the vulnerability was actually announced at the same time the exploit was. So it's definitely an exploit. So KDE, this affects KDE 4 and 5. If you're not aware, KDE Plasma is the name of the desktop. KDE is the name of the community, so KDE Plasma 4 and 5 is really technically the accurate thing, but whatever. So what this happens is it makes it possible to do command injection inside of the .desktop files. It also can be done in .directories, and you can actually download an archive and extract that archive, and it would execute these commands without technically your manual interaction, because all you have to do is view the files rather than execute the files. And that's where the vulnerability comes from. And the exploit is in the tweet that is actually on screen right now. So you could put that into a .desktop file and it would do this command injection. Now, the reason why I'm annoyed by this, not necessarily because it's a vulnerability that was found. Of course, if you find a vulnerability, absolutely let them know that you did. It's that he didn't let them know. And that's why it's annoying. So this particular case, the developer or the researcher of this this exploit didn't tell KDE that they found the vulnerability. What they did was release it on Twitter, and then at that point, finally tell KDE. So I think that's a very irresponsible, unprofessional thing to do in terms of security. So a white hat person is someone who is a hacker or a security researcher who finds problems and helps fix them. Now this is someone who technically helped fix it, but at the same time provided an exploit prior to it being fixed. And the issue, I think, kind of boils down to why they did it, because it's very weird. So on the Twitter replies to this particular tweet about the announcement, someone asked, did you inform the vendor, aka KDE, which they did not. And what is the reason that you decided to disclose this as a 0-day exploit? If you're not aware, 0-day means the moment the vendor is aware of a vulnerability, that is day 0. So if you release something without the vendor having mitigated it on the day that they tell them, then you are creating a 0-day exploit. Now, the recommended structure of this is that sometimes the 0 days exploits are required to be released because, for example, you contact a company, you give them 90 days to fix it, and then they don't fix it. And then, or in some cases, even a year goes by and they still haven't even bothered to try to fix it. So in some cases, security researchers will release this information as a 0-day because in the sense that there's no mitigation during the once you release it. However, this is not what happened here. What happened here is that this researcher did not even tell KDE, and instead they went onto Twitter and did a Twitter poll asking their followers should they submit it to the bugs.kde.org or, and I quote here, drop it like it's hot. Now, the people who voted chose to drop it like it's hot, and therefore they did. Now, that is one of the worst ways to decide whether or not to be professional and let the developers know that there's a vulnerability or not. But that's what happened. So this is actually not a big deal overall. It's just irresponsible and unprofessional. That's why I was annoyed and I want to talk about it. So if you are a security researcher, or if you're that individual security researcher, please don't do that again, because that's not cool. It's actually kind of messed up, especially considering, random people on Twitter are the people who decided whether to do that or not. So he did technically say that he did tell KDE, but he told them once it was already released on Twitter, which doesn't really count because KDE didn't have any time to do anything about it. And it actually only took them less than 24 hours to actually fix it. So I think the reason is because had they told KDE that this was a problem, it wouldn't have been a 0-day, and it wouldn't have gotten press. And people wouldn't have known who this person is. Maybe that's why. I don't know. I could be just overthinking it, more than likely am, but it is weird that I'm talking about a 0-day exploit that would have been fixed in less than a day had they known about it. So that means that they didn't know about it, and that's not cool. It's also worth noting that this particular problem, this particular exploit, is very, 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 very unlikely that you would be affected by it. It's not like this huge thing that people were promoting it on websites about how KDE is vulnerable, you need to switch, or whatever, or not use Linux or whatever. There's a couple that were really hyperbolic about it. But the reality is that it's .desktop files and .directory files. How many people actually download those files? Very few. Now, applications will create those when you install something, but the odds that you're going to get a malicious .desktop or .directory file from your applications that you're installing is not very high. And the odds that someone will just randomly download those files, also not very high. So it's not that big of an issue, so it's pretty much overblown. But at the same time, it is an issue. It did happen, but it didn't need to get anywhere near as big as it did. And none of those hyperbolic articles or whatever would have even happened had this security researcher not done what they did. More than likely. I can't guarantee that, but more than likely. So, yeah. If you'd like to learn more about this particular topic, I'll have a link to the tweets and some other things, including the response from KDE, in the show notes below. So we're on another loop for that roller coaster of emotion, and that is LibreOffice 6.3 has been released, which is fantastic. 6.3 is mostly a maintenance and bug fixes release, but they've actually added a lot of cool features, including they've done some features for improvement for performance of opening files, which is awesome because they say that based on their testing that up to 97% faster at opening files, which is really good. They also gave an option for redacting different things inside of a document for hiding sensitive information. That's pretty cool. I mean, it's not necessarily that important. It doesn't seem like an important feature, but it totally could be if you wanted to share a document with someone, but you didn't want them to have some specific information, but you did want them to have the other content. You could just hide what you didn't want to show, and they gave you options to do that, which is really cool. They've also made better layout, providing more space for working on your document, which is good because they made it better for like the margin area. And that's nice. They've made it where the page backgrounds now cover the entire page, not just up to the margins, which is really good because it makes it a lot easier to customize and make templates for your stationery and that kind of thing, which is really cool. And they've also done some more improvements to autocorrect, spreadsheet tabs. They've improved the calculations and additional options for calculations. They've made better support for Microsoft files. They've like the compatibility with Microsoft Office files like doc files and Excel files and that kind of thing. So it's really, really cool. And if you'd like to learn more about this release, I'll have a link to it in the show notes for LibreOffice 6.3. Up next in the show is some more roller coaster stuff because this is good news and also a little bit of like, I mean, it's not bad news. It's just good news that has a little bit of an asterisk associated to it. And that is the AMD Ryzen 3000 series BIOS updates are now arriving. So there's the other various companies are releasing the updates to make it where, if you didn't hear about this in a previous episode, we talked about how the AMD Ryzen 3000 series was having issues with booting Linux, but only in newer distros. So for example, if they were using Ubuntu 18.04, they would be totally fine because AMD tested on 18.04, but they didn't seem to test on newer things. So there were some newer versions of systemd, and that kind of created some issues in various different distros. So if you were an Arch user, or if you even used Ubuntu 19.04, you wouldn't be able to use the new hardware, which is really, really weird because one of the big things about using AMD is that the drivers are not available on some distros because they are connected to the Mesa drivers and the kernel drivers. And because of that, the newer distros usually have better support, except for this time. So that's really weird. But now they're releasing, they've already released a patch and a fix from AMD, but they're now rolling out from the motherboard manufacturers because unfortunately it has to come from a firmware update from the motherboard manufacturers in order for you to get these fixes and be able to use new distros. So for example, Asus has released updates for their boards that fixes these problems. MSI has released some updates, but there's a little bit of a question whether or not it works now. Right, there have been firmware updates, but we don't know exactly because some people are saying that it's working, some people are saying it's not. So I don't know. There's also other manufacturers that haven't done the firmware updates yet. So anyway, it's good that this is rolling out now, but it's not fully rolling out. So a little bit of an asterisk right there. Okay, I didn't do this on purpose, by the way. I didn't make this roller coaster thing on purpose. It just happened to be how I laid things out, and then I didn't realize it was going to be this like this until now during the recordings. But the next topic is a really good news that also has an asterisk to it, and that's NVidia releases the documentation for their GPU hardware on GitHub. Now, this is great because they've released it publicly, freely available, even with an MIT license on GitHub that helps the Nouveau project be able to look at this documentation and make better support for the open source drivers. Now, this is fantastic, but the asterisk is that it's still a work in progress, and it doesn't support all the interfaces, and it doesn't support all the hardware, but it's a start. And it's really great because when they released it, this makes it possible so that the Nouveau project doesn't have to reverse engineer everything like they used to, or they technically still do now, but this makes it possible for them to look at the documentation and make sure that the drivers are working as optimal as possible without having to worry about NDAs, because previously there were documentation for the programming for the hardware that was available to some people, but it required you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, so you couldn't actually do anything with it. But now, since this stuff is open source, or open license anyway, it makes it much more likely that the Nouveau drivers will get better and better much faster, which is awesome. Now, there's another asterisk in that the current Turing branch of NVIDIA hardware, which is the RTX 2080 or 20 series, 2080, 2060, and the 2060 Super, or whatever, that stuff is not included in this documentation because they're saying it's a work in progress and it takes time. You're like, okay, I guess. But Maxwell, Pascal, Volta, and Kepler are all included in this release. But not everything in them, or in those architectures or those branches, are included. So first of all, what's included is it covers the BIOS tables, it covers the device control block, device initialization, security around the Falcon engine, memory clocking and tweaking, shader program headers, power states, and various other bits and bobs and stuff like that. But there's a lot of significant things that are not there. But as they said, it's a work in progress. The thing that's makes me kind of laugh about the part of that they're saying it's a work in progress is because they announced that they were going to do this many years ago. They said that they say in their response to certain questions about this, saying it's a multi-year undertaking, it's taking time. Well, yeah, but you announced that you were going to do this in XDC 2013. So in 2013, NVIDIA made one of the biggest announcements that no one ever expected them to. They said they will begin publishing NDA-free GPU programming documentation. And 6 years later, they started doing it. So yeah, it's been many years, but why is it taking so long still? I would have assumed that there'd be some red tape or bureaucratic nonsense on getting in the way, but wouldn't you have to do that before you made the announcement in 2013? I don't know. So anyway, it's fantastic that NVIDIA is actually finally, embracing the openness in at least some way. They're probably never going to make their own open source drivers, but who knows? They might. I never expected them to do this in the first place, so I guess it's possible. Not likely, but it's possible. But anyway, great work to the Nouveau drivers, because those people have been doing reverse engineering of the NVIDIA drivers without any documentation, or when they do get documentations, it's like little sprinkles that are thrown at them. But most of the time when they get the documentation, it's stuff they already knew anyway, and it's just confirmation. So it's not really helpful at all. So I'm happy that the NVIDIA company has decided to finally do something on the right side of the the history kind of thing. But we'll see what happens in the future. If they actually do release the Turing stuff, that'd be great. And if they don't, it would not be surprising because it's NVIDIA. Whatever reason they decided to do it, I'm really happy that they did. And hopefully they will do even more in the future, because that's great. So if you'd like to learn more about this, I have a link to the Phoronix article in the show notes below. So I just want to take a brief moment in the show to let you know about some stuff regarding the community that has been built around the Tux Digital channel, as well as the Destination Linux podcast. So if you're not aware, I'm actually not only a host of This Week in Linux, I'm also a host of the Destination Linux podcast, which you can find out more about that podcast by going to destinationlinux.org. Now, I wanted to talk to you about the Telegram group and the Discord servers. Well, there's actually all some other stuff. There's like an IRC chat room. There's a Steam group for both. There's a bunch of other stuff that you can check out by going to destinationlinux.org/contact and tuxdigital.com/contact. But I wanted to mention the Telegram group because there's a lot of great conversations that happen in both the Tux Digital group as well as the Destination Linux group, and it's a very friendly group, and it's a lot of fun. So if you want to check it out, you can go to tuxdigital.com/telegram and destinationlinux.org/telegram. And if you would like to join the Discord servers, we have a lot of great conversations there as well, but also in a voice chat because there's voice servers associated to Discord servers. So you can jump in the voice channel. I'm typically in either Tux Digital or Destination Linux voice channels, randomly throughout the day, throughout the week, etc. There's not really a specific time that I show up on those, as well as there's not a specific time that a lot of people show up. But I do periodically show up quite a bit in those channels, so be sure to check that out. Destinationlinux.org/discord and tuxdigital.com/discord. So I hope to see you there. And just real quick, last replug to summarize. If you want to go to the contact pages, tuxdigital.com/contact and destinationlinux.org/contact, there will be links to everything in that. So there you go. Hope to see you there. So next in the show, we've actually gotten through all of the roller coaster stuff. So this is all just a bunch of good stuff. And let's get to it. So first of all, Voyager Linux, or Voyager Live 10 has been released. This is actually based on Debian Buster, so Debian 10, and that's why it's called Voyager 10. Now, Voyager Linux is an interesting distribution from France. They've actually got a couple different types of versions. So you have the Voyager 10, which is based on Debian. You have the Voyager 1904, that's based on Ubuntu. They also have an LTS version that's based on 1804 for Ubuntu. And seemingly, the Voyager Debian one would also be based as an LTS, but I don't know for sure on that one because there's some kind of a miscommunication thing where the developers who wrote the article about the release notes don't speak English as a native language, so it looks like a Google Translate thing, and some of it kind of doesn't make sense in the sense of like the context. So I can't really give you a guarantee about whether it's an LTS for the Debian version or not, but I think it is based on the kernel that they're using. But anyway, Voyager Linux is still an interesting distribution. It's not really meant to be like a beginners to Debian. They say that in their release notes, and they also suggest people to try it out on a separate machine if you have one, or I suppose a virtual machine would also work. But they suggest a separate hardware machine. But I think that it's still worth checking out if you are interested. One of the things that's odd at this point, it's not really odd, it's just interesting to note, that if you previously used Voyager in the past, or if you loaded 1804, you would get Xfce, but they've now transitioned to GNOME. And the reason they said for switching to GNOME was because that Debian didn't have Xfce support. But the Voyager 1904 is also using GNOME, I'm pretty sure. Because I don't think there is a Voyager 1904 version without the Voyager 1904 GE part. The GE is GNOME edition or GNOME edition. I'm not sure if they're switching away from Xfce or not, but the reason they gave for the Debian version not having Xfce was that the 4.14 was not released yet, and now it has. But also, it's even if it did release before the release of Voyager 10, it would still be like the Debian frozen branch was many, many months ago, so it still wouldn't be there. But, I'm just curious to see what happens in the future for Voyager, because maybe the Voyager Ubuntu Voyager 1910 might go back to using the Xfce approach because 4.14 being out. I'm not sure. It's still worth checking out if you want to. Just a little bit. They do say it's not for beginners. So if you do want to check it out, just keep that in mind. But I'll have a link to the latest release in the show notes below. Up next in the show is some interesting news from Canonical. So Canonical announced that Ubuntu 19.10 will get experimental ZFS root file system support and an install option when you set it up from the ISO. So they've actually had support for ZFS for quite a while from Ubuntu 15.10, but this is the first time they're going to have a file system support for the root file system. And what's interesting is that they're also going to have it as an install option. So when you boot your ISO to install Ubuntu 19.10, you will actually get an option to choose ZFS for the system. They haven't said how they're going to do that yet, or at least I haven't seen where they said that. So maybe it's going to be a checkbox for like an advanced user or something like that, but I doubt it's going to be very obvious because of its experimental status. But it's still very, very interesting. So I'm looking forward to see how they do that and how it worked out, because ZFS is a really interesting file system. So I am definitely interested in checking that out. So Canonical's Didier Roche, I think it's how you say his name, wrote a blog post about it on the official Ubuntu blog about the ZFS support intentions for Ubuntu 19.10. He reaffirmed their belief going back years that they're acting within the rights, also about the rights granted in the compliance with the CDDL and GPL. Now, that's one of the biggest hurdles that a lot of distributions have talked about, whether they should support ZFS or not, because there's some language in the CDDL that kind of conflicts with the GPL in theory. I mean, not actually. It's not like a direct conflict, but the waters are muddied enough where a lot of distributions just chose not to support it, and other distributions have said, you know what, we're just going to support it, whatever. And Ubuntu is one of those. So they're saying that they're acting within the rights granted and are in compliance with that, with both of those. So they're able to offer ZFS on Linux support within their kernel package as a built-in kernel module. So this is going to be currently for Ubuntu 19.10 or Eoin Ermine. I don't know. They're going to be using ZFS on Linux, which is a separate project. It's a completely different project that's working on getting ZFS support on Linux, and they're going to be using 0.8.1 of that particular project inside of the 19.10 release. So I think this is pretty interesting. If you're a fan of ZFS, you might be interested in checking this out when this happens, because I definitely will check it out, because ZFS is a pretty cool file system, and you know, if they feel comfortable with the licensing thing, you know, I guess. I don't know. I don't really know much about the problem with the two, but it has been a little bit sketchy over the years, so maybe it's a problem, maybe it's not. We'll see, I guess. If you'd like to learn more about this, I'll have a link to the Ubuntu Insights post about it in the show notes below. Up next in the show is a really interesting app called scrcpy, or screen copy is what I think they're trying to go for. So screen copy, I'm going to just say that from now on. They have the latest release is 1.10, but we're not going to talk about the specifics about that particular version. I just want to talk about the application itself, because it's a very interesting application. So this app provides the ability to display and control Android devices connected over USB and even Wi-Fi. Now the Wi-Fi is a little bit more involved. You have to go into like settings of IPs and stuff like that, because it uses TCP/IP for that. But it's still pretty cool, and it's still possible to do if you would like to. But the USB is just, you know, plug and go. So that's really cool. It doesn't require root access or anything like that. It supports using it over Linux, Mac, and Windows if for some reason you have those things. But if you did, you know, there you go. They have support there. So it's a really interesting app, because it gives you the ability to use your phone on your desktop as if it is just directly with the phone. And it also, they've talked about how light it is. They say it's native and displays only the device screen. And they claim to have performance between 30 to 60 frames, up to 60 frames, as well as quality of 1080p or above, depending on what kind of phone you have and what kind of hardware you have. They also say that it's very low latency, as at most it's 70 milliseconds, or at least you can get it 35 milliseconds, which is really good. They have low startup time, saying that about 1 second it takes to display the first image of the device. And they're saying that it's non-intrusive, because nothing is left installed on the device when you use it. So very, very interesting project. If you'd like to learn more, I'll have a link to their GitHub page in the show notes below. Up next in the show is some interesting news from Huawei. So we talked about their previous topic about Huawei with their Hongmeng, I'm not sure how to say it, OS. And they've seemingly changed the name to Harmony OS. There's not been complete confirmation that that's what's happening, but it does seem like that. And we've talked about some mobile OSs in the past, like, you know, of course, Android, but also the derivatives like Lineage and E that are focusing more on the privacy aspect. And Huawei is a company from China that's having some, they've had some alleged integration with the Chinese government, so they had some weird PR issues, and they even had some like banning from like sanctions against them from the U.S. government, which meant that most companies in the U.S. couldn't, actually pretty much every company in the U.S. couldn't do business with them, which was then recently lifted a little bit, sort of, but not completely. So it's a really complicated topic, and I'm not going to go into all the legal details about that because I'm not a lawyer and I don't really know that much about that particular issue. But what I do know is that it's interesting that Huawei is doing this because they were kind of forced in a position to have to, and they're doing it very quickly, and they've made some decisions that I think are pretty interesting. So first of all, the most important piece about this, like if Huawei had announced this OS and not this next piece, I would have not cared at all. But they did announce that the Harmony OS will be open source. So it also is going to support a variety of different devices. So the fact that it's open source is very important because you can pretty much guarantee that an operating system from Huawei will be audited very quickly, if not immediately, and by a lot of different groups, because it's going to be utilized heavily. Because Huawei is like the second largest smartphone manufacturer or whatever in the world. So it's going to be used a lot, and they're also going to be using it on routers and TVs and other kinds of things. So it will because it's open source, it will most likely be audited very quickly. They've actually already announced a TV, like the next day after they announced Harmony OS, they announced a TV that was going to be using Harmony OS, and the specs of that TV look really cool. They also are going to include a camera in the TV, which I have no idea what that's for, but it's going to have like a pop-out camera like some of their phones do, but okay. Probably not the most useful thing or something I would want in my TV. Maybe people do. I'm going to go with no for me. But anyway, what's another thing that's really interesting about this is that they are saying that the platform will support a range of applications, including HTML5, which that's kind of a given. Also, Linux apps and Android apps. So I'm not really sure how they're going to be doing that, but they're making a claim that it's going to support all of those, which will be very interesting for Harmony OS because it's not based on Linux, but it will support Linux-based apps. Not sure how that's going to happen, but very interesting to see what happens. I mean, I don't really know exactly what their kernel is, what kernel they're using, but they call it, they're saying that they're using a microkernel, which the Linux kernel is not a microkernel, so that's why I'm saying it's probably not based on Linux, but we don't know for sure because I haven't found any information about whether or not, or what kind of kernel they're using, I mean. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But Huawei said that they do not plan to replace Android right away, but this is essentially their plan B that being built, and they're trying to do, like, just to make sure that if they have to deal with another ban or some other kind of thing, that they will have something ready to go. But it does seem like they're going to be replacing Android. It just won't be, super fast. If the sanctions were still up, they would definitely do it quicker. But maybe because they're dropped a little, or not completely dropped, but like a little bit relaxed, makes it easier for them to keep using Android. Might make it longer for them to do it. But anyway, it's still interesting, especially considering Google has their Fuchsia OS, which will be replacing Linux as the kernel with their own kernel. So when Google does this and Android is kind of put in the back burner, it's kind of a necessity for other companies to have something or to go with Fuchsia. So it's definitely interesting to see what happens with Huawei because there's a lot of potential for some interesting things as well as some very negative things. We don't really know for sure, but I'm really happy that they did open source it or they're going to open source it. I don't know if they have it or not, but I am very interested in what happens with the audited stuff because you can pretty much guarantee someone's going to do that. But anyway, they say Android isn't as efficient due to its redundant codes, outdating scheduling mechanism, and general fragmentation issues, and that's why they're going to do it. So I am definitely interested in what happens. If I hope you are too, just let me know in the comments below if I should continue to cover stuff like this, because technically it's not Linux related, but they're claiming it has Linux app support, so sort of, maybe a little bit, kind of is, whatever. If you are interested and you want me to continue to follow this topic, let me know in the comments below. And if you'd like to check out this current topic, I'll have a link to it in the show notes. And finally this week, we have a new Humble Bundle. And now this is the Coding and App Development Bundle by Packt. So there's quite a few things in here. There's a lot of books. So I'm not going to list everything, but you can check out if you'd like in the show notes. In the description, I'll have a link to this. And so if you want to learn web development with Vue.js, Django, WordPress, Angular, jQuery, Node.js, and Laravel, I don't know. Or if you want to learn about React and React Native, or if you want to learn Android 9 development, and even some books about the Qt 5 toolkit, which is the best toolkit. Yeah, check it out if you're interested in developing. Qt, for sure, the best one. Anyway, there's also quite a few other ones, like some .NET stuff and, some more. But there's quite a few good books about some good languages, not like .NET, and also some good toolkits like Qt. And if you'd like to learn more, or you'd like to check out the Humble Bundle, for the Coding and App Development Bundle, I'll have a link to it in the show notes and in the description. Now, just to be clear, this is an affiliate link, so if you do want to purchase it, a small percentage, or like a commission, will be going to the Tux Digital channel, as well as the this Week in Linux podcast. So if you do decide that you'd like to check it out, please use the link in the description, because that would help me out, and I would very much appreciate it. So link in the description for the Humble Bundle, Coding and App Development Bundle by Packt. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on this show, please like that smash button and be sure to subscribe. If you'd like to support the Tux Digital channel, we have multiple ways to contribute via PayPal, Patreon, sponsors, and many others. You can learn more by going to tuxdigital.com/contribute. Or you can order the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt by going to tuxdigital.com/Linux is Everywhere. Or if you're in Europe, you can go to tuxdigital.com/Linux is Everywhere EU for shipping inside of Europe. We also have ways to contribute without any cost to you by using our affiliate links. You can find links for places like Amazon, Private Internet Access, Humble Bundle, and many more by going to tuxdigital.com/affiliates. And if you'd like some more podcasting goodness from me, then check out the latest episode of Destination Linux, as I'm a co-host of that show. Thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tennell with Tux Digital, and as always, keep using, learning, and enjoying Linux.